Welcome to the Architectural History module in Semester 6 for Bachelors of Architecture. The next lecture on the module is Haussmannization, Old City, New Splendor. In Paris of Francis I, there was no public urban spaces of major significance. Notre Dame was approached across a pavee far smaller in area than the present day. The ill-defined areas was only the public spaces around of any size. Views along the Seine from the three bridges were prevented by them being continuously lined with buildings and a general street pattern. The banks of Seine was also completely built up. This does not mean that the city did not have any open public spaces or private ones, but they were particularly convent gardens. The town was still half rural. These open spaces and often extensive private gardens gradually disappeared during the 17th and 18th century on a result of complex property speculation. Renaissance urbanism in Paris covers the period between Francis I and the end of the 18th century. During this, grand boulevards, Champs-Élysées, etc. were built. The work of Renaissance urbanists was essentially limited to creating isolated parts of city, either on undeveloped land within and adjoining the city or by carving developments out of the existing fabric. The most important examples of this work are the 5 royal statue squares described further on. In Paris and major provincial cities, these squares glorifying the monarchy are preeminently the grandest examples of the kind of urban aggrandizement. The present-day pattern of Paris within the limits of the 1845 fortification is result of the 19th century restructuring. Reconstruction also falls under the premise of planned demolition for the purpose of urban renewal. The most famous exponent of massive urban surgery is Baron Haussmann, whose Grand Troweur redrew the plan of Paris between 1850 and 1870, providing a model for old cities everywhere anxious to meet the needs of modern traffic. These insertions were referred to literally disemboweling or eviscerating, suggested a surgical metaphor in line with seeing the city as a subject to pathological disorders. Haussmannization is often synonymous with social engineering in that it relieves the city of their populist ferment and isolates the possessing classes from the pressures of the poor and the unempowered. The eminent domain, the power of condemnation, and compulsory purchase is legalized force. It exercise justifies expropriation, and the central fact of expropriation, however scrupulous the procedure or fair the recompense, is coercion. Private property is commandeered against the wishes of its owners for some presumed public good. After surgery, the redesigned urban land might be turned over or sold to a third party, and it is that the developer, entrepreneur, or perhaps the city itself who enjoys the benefits of the new arrangement and not the original property holder. The overall benefits of Haussmannization, as the state repeatedly advertises, are supposed to be public health, tied to slum clearance and access to light and air, the smooth flow of traffic, creation of modern housing and business premises, and social order. The French concern of this last regard was the thwarting of street barricades whose origins are credited to 15th century Paris. Haussmann's success in dealing with this threat is obvious in that in the 1871 Commune uprising, revolutionary strongholds were in the areas where there had been no evictments, but note that Haussmann's interventions and their consequent displacements may have instigated as much as a social unrest as the plan was designed to suppress. In the middle of the 19th century, the center of Paris was overcrowded, dark, dangerous, and unhealthy. Densely populated, which was approximately 3 square kilometers per pupil. Major reasons for the cholera epidemic in the year of 1832 to 48. The traffic circulation was also another major problem the city faced. Also the consideration of incapability of streets to cater to military expeditions, that is to crush the revolts that happened within the city. With the downfall of Napoleon Bonaparte and rise of Louis Napoleon III, new policies for expropriating the land were brought in. The grand crossroads were designed connecting east and west and north and south major street development. New hotels were built in, new parks and gardens, new squares, new railroad stations were designed. Huge new parks were constructed on the edge of the city. It was planned to construct a 27-kilometer new avenues and streets, along with renovations of the existing garden. A construction of a 28-kilometer new boulevard was decided, with new avenues and streets on the annexed land. For his role in changing the Paris cityscape, Haussmann would acquire the nickname the Demolisher. He had ploughed over ancient winding streets of the city. In their place, he created broad straight boulevards that were impervious to the barricade, and equally important, they could better accommodate the free movement of troops. The avenues also allowed for easy flow of commerce and so were a boon for business. Napoleon III had dreamed of a new imperial city whose very streets spoke of glory of the French Empire, and Haussmann delivered. As with every urban renovation, a percentage of the population was displaced. Haussmann forced citizens from their homes as these buildings were torn down to make way for new clean lines of the new city. Haussmann's Paris, with its broad, elegant boulevards and vistas, artfully focused on monuments, also became a model for something else. An urban life as a work of art, as aesthetic experience, a public spectacle. It is in fact evident that many of his emulators were less interested in the functional aspects of this program than in the urbanity and worldliness it conferred on their cities. The legal presumption that running new streets or opening squares against the grain of the old streetscape is for public good has a relatively short history. The violation of private property rights for the welfare of the community was more clearly argued for public works like aqueducts and sewer lines, in the matters of planning, and in abstract or concepts like circulation or, worse, urban embellishment. In France, Declaration of the Rights of Man issued in 1789, Article 17, specified that the property is an inviolable and sacred right. No one can be deprived of it unless a public necessity, legally established, requires it and upon just previous compensation. The law of 1841, which Haussmann inherited, spoke of the public works and said that they were decreed by the legislature. Public necessity having been declared by the administrative power, the courts, after having ensured that the regularity formalities were followed. Order of expropriation of private property, indemnity is fixed by a special jury. This law makes specific reference to the grand works only to royal roads, canals, railroads, reservoirs, and docks. Even when interpreted to include urban development, the enabling agency could only demolish property that fell within the lines of the proposed new street. Further legislation in 1850 relative to the clearing of insanitary housing paved the way of Haussmann's claim that the rehabilitation of the entire blocks could be seen as a matter of public utility. A decree of March 1852 concerning the streets of Paris went further. It asserted for the first time that in all expropriation projects for the widening, straightening, or formation of the streets of Paris, the administration will have the option to include the totality of the affected real estate, if it determines that the remaining fragments are not of an area that would permit the putting up of salubrious constructions. The legal sanctions of the concept of access condemnation went hand in hand with new associations of landowners encouraged by Haussmann, which had the power to reconstruct a block or a section and impose a majority decision on the members who held the block. The French example led to similar expropriation laws in Belgium, Italy, and England. But none enjoyed the generous provisions of the access condemnation which Haussmann secured for himself, and no city quite matched the scope and comprehensiveness of his grand works. Haussmann was given Paris to design it, to give it air and open space, to connect and unify different parts of the city into whole and make it more beautiful. The first phase of the renovation desired by Napoleon III was the Great Cross in the center of the Paris that would permit easier communication east to west and north to south. The Grand Cross had been proposed by the convention during the revolution began by Napoleon I, and Napoleon III was determined to complete it. Completion of the Rue was given an even higher priority because the emperor wanted it finished before the opening of the Paris Universal Exposition of 1855, only 2 years away, and he wanted the project to include a new hotel, the first large luxury hotel, to house the imperial guests during the exposition. Under the emperor, Haussmann had great power than any of his predecessors. The French Senate had simplified the laws on expropriation, giving him the authority to expropriate all land on either side of a new street, and that he did not have to report to the parliament and only to the emperor. The second phase included a network of new boulevards. The first phase of the renovation constructed around 6 miles of new boulevards, costing a net cost of 278 million francs. The official parliamentary report of 1859 found that it had brought air, light, and healthiness, procured easier circulation in the labyrinth that was constantly blocked and impenetrable, where streets were winding, narrow, and dark. It had employed thousands of workers, and most Parisians were pleased by the results. The second phase, as approved by the Emperor and Parliament in 1858 and begun in 59, was much more ambitious. Haussmann intended to build a network of wide boulevards to connect the interior of Paris with the ring of grand boulevards built by Louis XVIII during the Restoration, and to the new railroad stations which Napoleon III considered the real gates of the city. He planned to construct 16 miles of new avenues and streets at the cost of 180 million francs. In 1860, Napoleon III officially annexed the suburbs of Paris out to the rings of fortifications around the city. The residents of the suburbs were not entirely happy because they had to pay higher taxes and wanted to keep their independence, but had no choice since Napoleon III was the emperor and could arrange the boundaries. Haussmann was keen to expand the boundaries as well, since enlarged tax base would provide vital funding for the public works that was underway. With the annexation, facilities had now to pay tax on raw materials and fuel they used. With the annexation of Paris, it enlarged from 12 to 20 arrondissements, the number today. The annexation more than doubled the area of the city from 3,300 hectares to 7,100 hectares, and population instantly grew from 400,000 to 1,600,000. The annexation made it necessary for Haussmann to enlarge his plans and to construct new boulevards to connect the new arrondissements with the center. The third phase of renovations was proposed in 1867 and approved in 69, but it faced much more opposition than the earlier phases. Napoleon III had decided to liberalize his empire in 1860 and to give greater voice to the parliament and to the opposition. The emperor had always been less popular in Paris than the rest of the country. The Republican opposition in Parliament focused its attack on Haussmann. Haussmann ignored the attacks and went ahead with the third phase, which planned to construct 17 miles of new boulevards at an estimated cost of 280 million francs. Haussmann did not have the time to finish the third phase as soon as he came under intense attack from the opponents of Napoleon III. The downfall of Haussmann started in 1870. Napoleon III and Haussmann commissioned a wide variety of architecture, some of it traditional and some of it very innovative. Many of the buildings were designed by the city architect Gabriel Daou, who designed everything from the city halls and theatres to park benches and kiosks. Since 1801, under Napoleon I, the French government was responsible for building and maintenance of churches. Haussmann built, renovated, or purchased 19 churches. He renovated 5 temples and built 2 synagogues. Besides building churches, theatres, and other public buildings, Haussmann paid attention to the details of the architecture along the street. The city architect designed garden fences, kiosks, shelters for visitors to the parks, public toilets, and dozens of other small but important structures. Prior to Haussmann, Paris had only 4 public parks. In addition to the parks, the city's botanical garden was the oldest park present. Napoleon III had already begun construction and wanted to build more new parks and gardens for the recreation and relaxation of the Parisians, particularly those in the new neighborhoods of the expanded city. Napoleon's third new parks were inspired by his memories of the parks in London, especially Hyde Park, where he had strolled and promenaded in a carriage while in exile. But he wanted to build on a much larger scale. Haussmann had written in his memoirs that Napoleon III instructed him to not miss an opportunity to build in all the arrondissements of Paris, the greatest possible number of squares, in order to offer the Parisians, as they have done in London, places for relaxation and recreation for all the families and children, rich and poor. In response, Haussmann created 24 new squares, 17 in the older part of the city, 11 in the new arrondissements, adding 15 hectares of green space. Haussmann's goal was to have one park in each of the 18 neighborhoods of Paris so that no one was more than 10 minutes away from such a park. The parks and squares were an immediate success with all classes of Parisians. The most famous and recognizable feature of Haussmann's renovation of Paris are the Haussmann apartment buildings which line the boulevard of Paris. Street blocks were designed as homogeneous architectural wholes and had treated the buildings not as independent structures but as piece of a unified urban landscape. In Haussmann's Paris, the streets became much wider, growing from an average of 12 meters wide to 24 meters wide, and in the new arrondissements often to 18 meters wide. The interior of the buildings were left to the owners of the buildings, but the facades were strictly regulated to ensure that they were the same height, color, material, and general design and were harmonious when all seen together. The Haussmann facade was organized around horizontal line that often continued from one building to the next. Balconies and cornices were perfectly aligned without any noticeable alcoves or projection at the risk of uniformity of certain quarters. Rue de Rivoli served as a model for the entire network of new Parisian boulevards. For the building facades, the technological progress of stone sawing and steam transportation allowed the use of massive stone blocks instead of simple stone facing. The street side result was a monumental effect that exempted buildings from a dependence on decoration, sculpture, and other elaborate stonework would not become widespread until the end of the century. Before Haussmann, most buildings in Paris were made of brick or wood and covered with plaster. Haussmann required that the buildings along the new boulevards be either built or faced with cut stone, usually the local cream-colored limestone, which gave more harmony to the appearance of the boulevards. He also required, using a decree from 1852, that the facades of all buildings be regularly maintained, repainted or cleaned at least every 10 years under the threat of a fine of 100 francs. Haussmann's renovation of Paris had many critiques during his own time. Some were simply tired of the continuous construction. He was blamed for Paris to lose its ancestral appearance, its character, which was passed from generation to generation. The picturesque and charming ambience which the forefathers had passed on was demolished, often without good reason, was one of the comments of the critic. Several historians blamed Haussmann for not preserving more of the historic streets of Paris and clearing up open spaces while hiding other major historical monuments. He was also blamed for, in order to reduce costs, destroying several historic residences along the routes of boulevards because of his unwavering determination to have straight streets. He was condemned for his designs as the avenue that cut at right angles through the center of the entire old city. One could no longer feel the old world charm. While he was rebuilding the boulevards of Paris, Haussmann simultaneously was rebuilding the dense labyrinth of pipes, sewers, and tunnels under the street, which provided Parisians with basic services. Haussmann wrote in his memoirs, "The underground galleries are an organ of the great city, functioning like an organ of the human body. Without seeing the light of day, clean and fresh water, light and heat circulate like various fluids whose movements and maintenance serves the life of the body." Haussmann began with the water supply. Before Haussmann, drinking water in Paris was either lifted by steam engines from the Seine or brought by a canal started by Napoleon I. First, it addressed the city's freshwater needs by constructing a system of aqueducts that nearly doubled the amount of water available per person per day and quadrupled the number of houses with running water. The aqueducts discharged their water in the reservoirs situated within the city inside the limits. New sewer tunnels under each sidewalk of the new boulevards were constructed, which were large enough to evacuate rainwater immediately. The underground labyrinth built by Haussmann also provided for gas and heat for lights to illuminate Paris. At the beginning of the Second Empire, gas was provided by approximately 6 different private companies. Catherine de' Medici, widow of Henry II, tired of living in the cramped enclosed courtyards of the Louvre, commissioned in 1563 to build a new palace outside the walls with a spacious Italian-style garden extending to the west. This was the Tuileries Palace, unfinished, when she died in 1568 and was completed by Henry IV and Louis VIII. A link was created from the new palace to the Louvre by this Galleria. The Louvre itself was fortunate to escape the damaged western ends of north-south wings, which were restored in 1873, giving a present-day open-ended courtyard. At the end of the 16th century, though self-contained, the gardens and palace still had essentially directionless layout, and there was no hint of the dramatic westward thrust to flow. For the first time, Parisian society could take attractive open-air recreation, enjoying fountains, labyrinth, and grotto. Greater developments were followed in westward direction. The aim was to transform the whole nature of the garden design from static to dynamic, with the thrust of the axis generated within the garden extended outward by the avenue, which now became Champs-Élysées. The outward thrust of the movement systems generated from the firm building masses penetrates further and further into the countryside. It stimulates similar axial thrust originating in the chateaux and palaces about Paris, which also extend and intertwine, creating in the late 18th and 19th century the form of regional development unique to the history of the city building. In 1709, extensive tree planting had matured sufficiently for the general area to become known as Champs-Élysées. In 1724, the main axial avenue was extended. Further extension west down of the bridge was the work of following successors. Another important aspect is the Place de la Concorde. This was the vast square at the eastern end of Champs-Élysées, built between 1755 and 1775. Over 60 architects had submitted proposals for a competition for the same. Originally, this area appears as an informally used transition space. It had typically organic paths and patterns unaffectedly, surprisingly by the continuation of either the main Champs-Élysées. The royal squares of the 17th century were essentially closed spaces, landscape elements, infrequently used and only as minor roles dominated by architectural form. The first problem here was to define the place without separating it from the existing landscape spaces. The second was to organize a planned relationship of the four existing axes which cross the site. In the original plan, landscape elements had played a more important space-defining role than buildings, which formed part of the northern side of the place. The axial entrances in the center of the four sides were taken across the ditch to the total 6 bridges, giving Place de la Concorde its present-day appearance. Commencing with the palace and the gardens for Catherine de' Medici in 1563, and creation of this part of Paris took around 250 years. It took successive clients, both royal and civic, employing a sequence of provincial advisors respected where their inheritance of the past contributed towards the eventual realization of magnificent organized urban achievements. Haussmann was also blamed for social disruption caused by his gigantic building projects. Thousands of families and businesses had to be relocated when their buildings were demolished for the construction of new boulevards. Haussmann was also blamed for dramatic increase in rents, which increased by 300% during the Second Empire, while wages, except for those of construction workers, remained flat, and blamed for the enormous amount of speculation in real estate market. He was also blamed for reducing the amount of housing available for low-income families, forcing low-income Parisians to move from the center to the outer neighborhoods of the city where rents were lower. Statistics showed that population of the 1st and 6th arrondissements, where some of the most densely populated neighborhoods were located, dropped, while the population of the new 17th and 20th on the edges of the city grew rapidly. Haussmann defenders noted that his built was far more buildings than he tore down. He demolished 19,730 buildings containing 120,000 lodgings or apartments, while building 34,000 new buildings with 215,000 new apartments and lodgings. Critics blamed Haussmann for the division of Paris into rich and poor neighborhoods, with poor concentrated in the east and the middle class and wealthy in the west. Haussmann defenders noted that the shift in population had been underway since 1830s, long before Haussmann, as more prosperous Parisians moved to the western neighborhoods where there was more open space and where the residents benefited from prevailing winds which carried smoke from Paris's new industries towards the east. His defenders also noted that Napoleon III and Haussmann made special point to build an equal number of new boulevards, new sewers, water supplies, hospitals and schools in the eastern arrondissements as they did in the western neighborhoods. A form of vertical stratification did take place in Paris population due to Haussmann's renovation. Prior to Haussmann, Paris buildings usually had wealthier people on the second floor, while middle class and lower income tenants occupied the top floors. Under Haussmann, with the increase in rents and greater demand for housing, lower income people were unable to afford the rents for the upper floors. The top floors were increasingly occupied by concierge and the servants of those in the floors below. Lower income tenants were forced out to other outer neighborhoods where rents were lower. Some of Haussmann's critique had said that the real purpose of Haussmann's boulevards was to make it easier for the army to maneuver and suppress armed uprisings. Paris had experienced six such uprisings between 1830 and 48, all in the narrow, crowded streets in the center and east of Paris, left bank around the Pantheon. These critiques argued that the small number of large and open intersections allowed ease control by a small force. In addition, buildings set back from the center of the street could not be used as easily as fortifications. Some real estate owners demanded large straight avenues to help troops maneuver. The argument that the boulevards were designed for troops' movements was repeated by 20th century critiques. It was said that the troops and avenues were created such as reason and desire to avoid popular insurrections and barricades. They were strategic from their conception. Haussmann himself did not deny the military value of the wider streets. In his memoirs, he did mention that large boulevards resulting in gutting of old Paris, of the quarter of riots and barricades. He admitted he sometimes used this argument with the parliament to justify the high cost of its projects, arguing that they were for national defense and should be paid, at least partially, by the state. There was only one armed uprising in Paris after Haussmann, the Paris Commune, from March to May of 1871. In which the boulevards played no important role. The Communards seized power easily because the French army was absent and defeated and captured by Prussians. The Communards took advantage of the boulevards to build a few large forts of paving stones with wide fields of fire at strategic points, such as the meeting point of Rue de Rivoli and Place de la Concorde. But when the newly organized army arrived end of May, it avoided the main boulevards, advanced slowly and methodically to avoid casualties, worked its way around the barricades, and took the forces from behind. Most of Haussmann's projects had little or no strategic or military value. The purpose of building new sewers, aqueducts, parks, hospitals, schools, city halls, theatres, church, markets and other public building was, as Haussmann stated, to employ thousands of workers and to make city more healthy, less congested and more beautiful. Baron Haussmann's transformation of Paris improved the quality of life in the capital. Disease epidemics ceased, traffic circulation improved, and new buildings were better built and more functional than their predecessors. The Second Empire renovations left such a mark on Paris's urban history that all subsequent trends and influences were forced to refer to, adapt to, or reject, or to reuse some of its elements. By intervening only once in Paris's ancient districts, pockets of insalubrity remained, which explain the resurgence of both hygienic ideals and radicalness of some planners of the 20th century. The end of pure Haussmannism can be traced to urban legislation of 1882 and 84 that ended the uniformity of classical street by permitting staggered facades, first creativity for roof-level architecture. The latter would develop greatly after restrictions were further liberalized in the 1902 law. At the same time, this period was merely post-Haussmann, rejecting only the austerity of Napoleon-era architecture without questioning the urban planning itself. A century after Napoleon III's reign, new housing needs and the rise of new Fifth Republic began a new era for Parisian urbanism. The new era rejected Haussmannization ideas as a whole to embrace those represented by other architects such as Le Corbusier, in abandoning unbroken street facades, limitations of building size and dimension, and even closing the street itself to automobiles with creation of separated, car-free spaces between buildings for pedestrians. This new model was quickly brought into question by the 1970s, a period featuring a re-emphasis of Haussmann heritage. A new promotion of the multifunctional street was accompanied by limitations of the building model and in certain quarters by an attempt to rediscover the architectural homogeneity of the Second Empire street block. This is the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much for your kind attention.